You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's little mini-sode, I am not going to be load managed. We are looking at players who could be sell-high candidates, players whose performance I think is exceeding what they're going to do for the rest of the season. Michael Bolton, he is here, he is ready.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed. A bunch of guys that I'm looking at who I do... Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, and you might disagree with plenty of these, and if you do disagree with them, hey, let me know in the comments on the video below or tweet it at me because, hey, we can all have difference of opinion on things that might proceed into the future. And again, not an exhaustive list of players who are sell-high guys. So if you come in and say, oh, what about this guy? Yeah, maybe he's a sell-high guy as well. I just wasn't going to include 40 different guys in this video. Let's start off with number one. Again, not a ranked list, but Kyle Lowry currently is the 13th ranked player this season. Can he be around that second round mark for chunks of this season? Yes. Yeah, look, he can. I thought he'd be a really big option this year. I actually said, and many people, or most people disagreed with me when I said it, that I thought that he had a real chance to be the number one fantasy option in an overall per game ranking situation versus Pascal Siakam. So far, he's 13th and Siakam is 19th. Even if it doesn't end up that Lowry's ahead, they are relatively close. But the worry we have with Lowry, 39 minutes a game at the age of 33 and a half. That is a legitimate concern. Some of the Lowry playoff choke memes are obviously overblown because anyone throws choke out there, it's often bullshit. But what did generally happen is there was a stretch of about 3 or 4 seasons when we got to March and we got to April and we also got to the playoffs that Lowry would get hurt. He'd hurt his wrist, he'd hurt his knee, he'd hurt his back. His performance would drop down, his field goal percentage would drop down because Dwayne Casey would play him 37, 38 minutes a night. And by the time we got to March, with the way he plays in taking charges and being just a general hard ass, his production would fall off. And that's why I have him as a sell-high guy. Number one, he won't be able to maintain 39 minutes a night. Nick Nurse knows that. Nurse will reduce those minutes at some point, so the production will come down. There's also that fantasy playoff risk with Lowry that he's just not there, or he's the 70th ranked player by the time you get to the playoffs because he's not hitting 47% of his shots, which he's doing at the moment, obviously a high rate, 60% of twos. He's playing 32 minutes a night as they ease him back from whatever injury he had around the All-Star break. They are all legitimate concerns. So while I think Lowry can be a second round guy for the rest of this season on a per game basis, I just think that when we get to the business end of the season, some injuries and some poor performance might be an issue. So if you could trade him for any other second or maybe third round guy at this point, it's worth looking at. Now, if someone is a strict adherent to rankings, Lowry's ranked 13th and Brad Beal's ranked 28th. If you can make that swap, and you probably can't, but if you could do Lowry plus a back-end guy for Beal, that's something I do every day of the week, even though, of course, there's risks that Beal maybe sits out games at the end of the year. But that's the sort of buy low, sell high type of combination that I think you should be looking at. Another guy who ranks inside the top 20 so far this season is Brandon Ingram, who's been putting up huge numbers. He's looked great this season. Only 32 minutes a night. That's a big tick in his favor. 26 points per game. Fantastic. But there are some unsustainable things about what Ingram's doing. Is one of them his free throw shooting? Maybe. He was a 68, 68, and 62% shooter his first 3 seasons in the NBA. He's at 74. Now, a 74% free throw shooter is still a negative from a fantasy basketball point of view, but it's a negative 0.5 Z score versus negative 1.7 where he was last year. So 3 times he's reduced his impact by 3 times in a negative sense in that category. But the concern we have is that he's shooting 49% on threes. He was 33 last year and 39 the year before, but most importantly, he's taking 3 times the amount of attempts. Very rarely, and by very rarely I mean never, do you increase your attempts threefold and then still come out and be able to hit them at an elevated rate. So we know that Ingram is not going to be able to sustain 48%. Like, that's pretty clear. And the other thing we're not even factoring in is that Zion Williamson's not playing. Now, Zion's not back probably until December around Christmas time, but when Zion comes back, Ingram's not going to be maintaining a 29% usage. I think Drew Holiday will start to get some of his usage up. Pair that in with a drop in percentages, 58% on twos, Ingram's shooting. 52 last year, 48 the year before that. Improvements are all possible, but to that degree, maybe not. So I think there's some significant room for regression in what Ingram has done so far in what has been a really impressive start. Gordon Haywood is currently the 29th ranked player on a per game basis so far. It is largely helped by that big game he had in Cleveland yesterday. But again, so many of these sell high, buy low type players, look at the percentages and see what's not normal. 57% from the field for Haywood, shooting 50% from 3 and 59% from 2. Now, if I'm going to say that Ingram can't maintain 49% from 3, then I'm sure as shit Gordon Haywood's not going to continue to shoot 50% from 3. Now, Haywood has a history of being a decent volume three-point shooter. His volume's actually less than Ingram's this season. The assists are nice, 4.3. That can continue. 7.5 rebounds, maybe that's a little bit high, but he's playing at power forward this year. But all of those shooting numbers, they just feel unsustainable. And I've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast, but the three-point percentage category is a big influencer in fantasy basketball. You rise in that category or you drop in that category, and it influences 3 separate categories. It influences your points category, it influences your three-pointers made category, and it influences your field goal percentage category. So for one number that's not actually tracked per se in most fantasy leagues, it has the biggest impact on overall value. So when someone's shooting is way off or it's sky high, it has such a big influence on the overall value of that player, and that's what we're seeing at the moment with Gordon Haywood, who's a 50% three-point shooter. Bogdanovic, the Bojan variety of the Utah Jazz, he is the 32nd ranked player. I thought he would struggle a little bit coming into Utah. The second half of last season in Indiana, he was the number 1 offensive option, and now with Conley and with Mitchell, he was going to be the 3rd offensive guy, 4th depending on how you want to include how they use Rudy Gobert in that offense, but he's been fantastic. 20-point average so far, 3 threes a game, shooting 45% from 3. Now, that's not that outrageous for Bogdanovic because he's a really good shooter. It probably will drop a little bit, but 53% on twos and 95% from the line. Now, there's numbers there which you can look at and go, okay, could he be a 45% three-point shooter? It's not ridiculous. Maybe he's a 43 guy. Could he be a 95% free throw shooter? Again, not ridiculous, but he's not that good. He was at 81 last year, 87 the year before that, but 89 the year before that, so it's not that far off. Three-pointers, 43 last year, 40 the year before that. 45, it's just marginally high. But when you have marginally high in one category, marginally high in another category, plus by far a career best usage, that's where the alarm bells ring. His best usage was last season, 22.5. He's at 27. His field goal attempts are through the roof, and that is really impacting the overall value in what Bogdanovic is providing. Now, I think he's going to be better than I initially expected. I don't think that he's going to stick as a 20-point per game guy. But I have seen some wild trades go down involving Bojan Bogdanovic, so investigating what you can get for him at this point is absolutely worth it. The Jedi, OG Anunoby.
Hello there.
Hello there indeed. Anunoby was a real lost season from him last year, but that is not the case this year because he has been absolutely fantastic to begin this season, putting up some really, really strong numbers. Averaging, for a start, he's the 36th ranked player over the course of the season. Nobody saw him being that good. 34 minutes a game. I think that can probably stick. 12 points, 7 boards. But what we've got to look at here, there are 3 things that really stand out. Steals, 1.7. Now, he's really good at steals. I have a decent amount of confidence that can stick. 1.5 blocks is really high. That's really high. Now, he put up a lot of block numbers in college, and I was super pumped about him coming into the NBA out of college, hoping that those numbers would stick. They didn't. And this year, they're through the roof. Now, when we look at it, he had 9 blocks through his first 4 games. Great. 0 in the next 2. That is starting to go, well, maybe this is starting to regress and come back to earth. I'm just trying to look at his total numbers. He had just 22 blocks all of last season, and he's had 9 so far through 6 games. He's had a career of 36 blocks through his entire career, which has spanned 141 games. He's at 9 through 6 games. So there is, I think, some significant regression coming from OG in that area. He's also shooting 46% on 3 and 63% on 2s. Now, his 2s have been high through his career, 57 and 60. So he can be a decent finisher there, but he's not a 46% three-point shooter, and he's not likely to keep up those sky-high defensive numbers. That block rate is over double where it was last year. He's at a 50% increase in steal rate as well. So make no mistake, he's a must-roster player, but expecting him to return third-round value on the season, I think will probably end up getting you into a little bit of trouble. Jeremy Lamb of the Indiana Pacers is a top 50 guy at this point. 33 minutes a night, 17 points, 6.5 boards, 1.4 steals. And when we look at what he's doing, it's not crazy. 21.6% usage, 6 rebounds, 1.4 steals, 46, 85, and only 29% from 3. Like, they're not ridiculously crazy numbers, are they? Now, he's playing an additional 5 minutes from what he played in Charlotte last season. That's helping. His usage is almost the same as what it was. His percentages are almost identical. His rebounds rate is almost identical. But the worry I have there is when Victor Oladipo eventually returns, that Lamb will be someone that loses minutes. He's playing Oladipo's spot at the moment. Shifting him up to the 3, he might get a little bit lost playing there. So instead of playing 33 minutes a night, he probably goes down to 29 or 28. And that's a decent enough reduction in overall production that probably still keeps him as a top 100 guy, but not a top 50 player. So making that right decision, and people, as soon as any report comes out on Oladipo, all right, that will lessen the value of Lamb. So if we hear a report coming out say Oladipo's return to practice or he's taking contact work, as soon as that comes out, Lamb's value will drop off because people will immediately think that Oladipo's returning. Now, in general, when those reports come out with Oladipo, he's doing 5-on-5s or whatever it is that comes out, that doesn't mean that he's coming back straight away, but people will overreact. So as soon as that comes out, you're in trouble in terms of that Lamb value. So getting in earlier, getting a top 60 guy back, even though he might provide top 50 value for another 4 weeks, and that's a real possibility, getting that versus him being the 90th ranked player through January, February, March, I think is an important thing to at least investigate whether you're able to achieve that. Marcus Morris is another sell high guy, I believe. He's playing 34 minutes a night on the Knicks team, 18 points per game. Now, he's not doing it on high shooting because he's shooting 42% from the field. He's shooting 49% from 3, though. So imagine how bad that field goal percentage was if the 3s weren't going in at that rate. But to balance that out, and to be fair to Morris, he's shooting 38% on 2. So that number's likely to go up. He has been pretty much through his career like a 47% two-point shooter. He was at 51 last year, but the 3 previous seasons, he was at 47%. So we can expect some significant upwards regression, but he's also not a 49% three-point shooter. But my worry here with Morris is these 34 minutes a game. Like, he's getting absolutely force-fed into minutes. He's got a pretty decently high usage, 21% usage, but this Knicks team is going nowhere. Will Morris get traded to a contender? I don't know why people think he's the panacea for everything that ails teams. Will he get traded? Or will they just start to say, instead of playing 34 minutes a night, Marcus, can we at least see what Barrett can do at the 3? Can we see what Knox can do in more than 20 minutes? Now I've got a fair idea what Knox can do, and the answer to that is nothing. But there is a real sell-high feel about Marcus. He's had 29 and 28 points in each of the last 2 games. So really big production, really high usage in those games. Putting up really good numbers. Like, he's performing well, but it's about trying to foresee the future and not like just ride it on what's happening now, because you have to think that at some point he might go from 34 minutes a night to 30 minutes a night to 29 minutes a night. And if the 2-point is... And that balance between the 3s dropping and the 2s rising, like, is it enough to keep his scoring at that level? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. And in the past, he's been a guy that provides nothing outside of points and rebounds. His steals and blocks are also significantly elevated. He's gone from 0.4 blocks per 36, and literally per 36 minutes, this is his career numbers in blocks. 0.5, 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.3, 0.4, 0.3, 0.4. So to say that he doesn't block shots is an understatement. This year he's at 1.1. So I'll take 8 years worth of history to say he's not a shot blocker versus 7 games. So that's likely to decrease. Also hasn't been over 1 steal per 36 in the last 5 years, and he's at 1.2. So there is some significant indicators of regression coming. The next guy we're going to talk about, I think, or the last guy I'm going to talk about in today's video is Smokin' Joe Harris, who is amazingly the 66th ranked player for fantasy basketball so far this season. He's playing 34 minutes a night. The Kenny Atkinson doesn't play anyone over 30 minutes a night narrative is dead. You can piss all over that grave because that is finished. So he's playing 34 a night. He's shooting a huge percentage. Now, this is a bloke who is an excellent shooter. He hit 47% of his threes last year. And that is you look at that number and you go, that's not real. And then he went out and said, well, you know what? I'm going to be better because he's shooting 55% of his threes. And if there was one player in the league where I'd say, you know what? They might actually be able to hit 50% of their threes. It probably is this bloke. But even that feels like it's a step too far. 55% of threes on 6.3 attempts is a ridiculous amount. He's doing nothing else. His free throws are also weirdly low, so that could improve. He's averaging 15 points a game with not much else. But again, that 3-point percentage category is such an influencer. If that goes from 55 down to a still unbelievable 43%, then he goes from 3.4 triples a game to 2.5 triples per game, from 15 points down to 12 points, from 54% field goals down to 48% field goals. And, 50 ranking spots are lopped off already. So that's, when I try to project his numbers out, that's sort of where I see him sitting. And he's really riding a crest. And probably, look, with Steph and Clay both out, like the best active shooter in the league. Like, he's that good at being able to knock down these shots. But even that, I think there's some limitations as to how good he can be. So that is a bunch of sell high guys, 8 players there for me. Make sure you are, I don't know when you're listening to this, but you can check out the live pre-game show for Wednesday's games over on the YouTube channel. Subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on YouTube, of course. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.